Good morning. We are continuing in chapter 271, Reish Ayin Aleph, in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. We're holding by halacha ches, halacha number 8. And what we have coming forward is halacha number 8 is going to be the priority on what one does if one doesn't have enough funds for his Shabbos meals or his Shabbos Kiddush. How does it prioritize what to buy first? That's going to be halacha 8, which comes from our Gemara and Psachim. And then following that is going to be the longer discussion, which also stems from our Gemara and Psachim, which is the big bulk of what we discussed actually in Psachim, is this idea of a person who's in the middle of a meal covering the bread and making Kiddush in the middle. So all the various different details that goes around that, making a bracha hagafen, what kind of bracha, covering the bread, making hamoitzi again, all that is going to be covered, God willing. Halacha number 9, 10, 11, 12, I think even 13 also. Right? Yeah, 13 as well. Yeah, and then 14 begins the next section. So let's begin then. Where did we leave off, right? What was the last discussion? The last discussion was, we concluded our discussion on the nature of Kiddush being biblical or rabbinic, and how that affects a woman making Kiddush or a young child making Kiddush, and the interplay between the Kiddush of the cup over the Kiddush versus the Kiddush in davening. All right, that was our discussion, which is still going to be relevant, but the bulk of that discussion is pretty much settled. Okay, so let's begin the halacha 8. We have 4 things the person has to be worried about, or 4 expenses the person has spread over 2 meals. 4, maybe more. I think it's 4. So you have...
You don't count the third meal, Shabbos?
It doesn't mention it here.
Really?
Interestingly enough, does not mention it here. It only discusses the Friday night and Shabbos day, and presumably because here's the laws of Kiddush. And Shabbat and Shalosh Shuddahs, the third meal doesn't have any Kiddush. But you're right, it's interesting it's not mentioned here. Anyway, here are the items that he has on the list. You have Kiddush. Let's say it's 3 divided each into 2. 3 times 2. You have wine for Kiddush, you have bread, and then you have other necessities for your meal. Right? So Kiddush is the wine, and bread is the bare minimum for the meal, and then there's the rest of your meal.
Fish?
Whatever, salads, fish, meat, whatever the rest of your meal is. Okay? And you have that times 2 for Friday night and Shabbos day. So how do you prioritize between these things? This is going to be the discussion. Keeping in mind that number 1, bread is the essence of the meal, and without it, you have no meal. By Torah law, you have no meal without bread, otherwise it's a snack. Today, modern meals, which include a big steak, a salad, and the fries, and halacha is still a snack, because you didn't have bread. So the bread is the essence of your meal, that's number 1. Number 2, hypothetically, you can make Kiddush on bread too. Right, you can make Kiddush on bread, hypothetically.
After the wine.
No, you can make Kiddush on bread if you have no wine, right?
Yeah.
So that's number 2. We're talking about someone who has no funds, right? That's item number 2 to keep in mind. Item number 3 to keep in mind is that extraneous circumstances, you can rely on your Kiddush you did at Ma'ariv. And item number 4 to remember is that while the Kiddush at night is more important, the meal Shabbos day is more important. So it's all these priorities we have to consider when we create the priority list as to what one should purchase if a person's limited in funds. And this is where we are. Most of it's going to be familiar to us considering we learned it in the Gemara Psach. So let's see. Ches. A person who does not have enough means, look nice to buy, to purchase, yayin lekiddush b'layla. He doesn't have enough to buy wine for Kiddush at night. And lahachin sarche sudeh l'kavod yayin. And neither does he have enough to prepare his needs for the meal of night and day. Needs for the meal is not bread. Needs for the meal means things aside from bread. His fish, his meat, his soup, his salads. So he doesn't have enough for wine and the needs for the meal. Neither for night or day. And to also purchase wine for the day Kiddush. He doesn't have enough for these. So how does it prioritize? Number one, night Kiddush comes before everything else. So night Kiddush comes before day Kiddush, but also comes before your meal needs, your fish, your wine, and so on. So if you had enough money only for a cup of wine or a slice of meat, buy a cup of wine for Kiddush. Right? Because it's biblical. Even though he may fulfill that biblical obligation of making Kiddush over bread, and the fact that he's making Kiddush over wine is only rabbinic. Nevertheless, because this Kiddush is primarily biblical, its wine also takes precedent. What does Alter mean when he say this Kiddush is biblical?
That's what you were saying yesterday. This is the rabbis instituting it as a biblical.
So exactly,
you could make it on bread, but you really ought to do it on wine.
Right. So you could read when he says this Kiddush is biblical, he means this as in the night Kiddush rather than the day Kiddush. Or you could mean this Kiddush you're doing over the wine is the one that's going to be the biblical one, as we were learning yesterday. And perhaps that's correct. If we are correct, we might as well read it that way. Although again, you could read it this Kiddush as in the night Kiddush rather than the day Kiddush. But it could be he means this Kiddush you're doing right now as you're holding the cup is the biblical one, and therefore you ought to give it its full due, even though its full due is only rabbinic by nature, but you ought to give it its full due and its full, what's the right word?
Respect.
It's full respect, prioritizing that over a slice of meat or fish. Right? And therefore we continue, Chutz min hapas, with the exception of bread, which is not the needs of the meal, it is the meal. Shem ein le pas, because if you have no bread, lechem Mishnah, if you don't have 2 loaves of bread, this is a chiddush from the Alter Rebbe, as he explains in his footnote, that not only do you prioritize 1 loaf of bread over your cup of wine, but you prioritize 2 loaves of bread over your cup of wine, so you can have the lechem Mishnah, which is a chiddush. Which means, if I have enough money for 1 loaf of bread, and now I have enough money left for either a cup of wine or a second loaf of bread, Alter would say 2nd loaf of bread. That we have lechem Mishnah.
And you just make Kiddush over the bread.
Exactly. So he kedemis liyayin shel Kiddush halayla. Then having 2 loaves of bread, that takes priority over your night Kiddush. So far, here's our pecking order. Number 1 is bread for your meal, 2 loaves of bread for your meal. And number 2 is Friday night Kiddush. Right? And if you're going with priority number 1, because of not enough means, not you, I shouldn't say you, because God forbid none of us should ever be in such a position. But if a person was in such a position where he has doesn't have enough means to buy 2 loaves of bread and a cup of wine, so he's prioritizing the 2 loaves of bread. So he could demonstrate these 2 loaves of bread come in priority before the night Kiddush. The Kaddish pass, and he'll make Kiddush on the bread. He'll pick up the 2 loaves of bread, say Yom HaShishi, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam ha'motzi lechem min haaretz, and then I'll say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher baruch habanu v'kolam, asher kishonu mitzvosav v'ratzabanu v'Shabbos Kiddush b'avrotzen, the whole bracha of Kiddush holding the 2 loaves of bread.
But here's what they're saying though here is that if you have the bread already, it's a question of whether you have enough for wine and let's say something else. You ought to buy the wine. So it's bread, right? Wine for Kiddush night Kiddush, rest of your needs for your meal. So far, that's the priority. Bread 1, because you can make Kiddush on bread. Is, but if let's say they already have their bread needs, and you could theoretically say, well, okay, but if it's either between wine and something else, I could do my Kiddush over bread.
He says no.
Right.
He says no. So bread number 1, wine for Kiddush number 2, rest of your Shabbos meal needs number 3.
Right.
Fish, wine. So why does bread take precedent over the Kiddush? The fisha pasu ikar mitzvah sudas Shabbos, because the bread is the primary mitzvah of the Shabbos meal. You cannot fulfill that mitzvah of a meal without bread. as shall be explained in chapter 274.
Why are we allowed to use sometimes matzah?
Matzah counts as bread.
But it's not
Bread just means matzah is called poor man's bread, but it's still bread. We differentiate in English between matzah and bread colloquially, but in essence, bread is a baked good made of flour and water. Whether it happens to have risen or not doesn't change its status as bread. It's a hamoitzi object.
Bread is bread and flour and water, right?
Correct, which means matzah is also bread.
Some using water.
Sure, matzah has water.
Sure.
It's flour and water. It just it hasn't risen. No yeast hasn't risen, but it's flour and water. On Pesach, you make hamoitzi on matzah, right? And that's how you make your meal. That's the bread of your meal on Shabbos Chol Pesach. Your meal is what's the difference?
There's no water in there.
Sure, there's water in there.
No, after.
We don't mix water after, but how do you make of course it's water. It's flour and water. Not just flour and water, absolutely.
It's just guarded in the field, so it doesn't.
Get extra wet or whatever, but it's certainly flour and water. That's how you make it into dough. That's how you bake it. Yeah. So matzah is bread for the purposes of this conversation, of this discussion. In English, we separate it because it makes it easier to say this is bread and this is matzah. But in essence, from halachic perspective, matzah is called pas, bread. The same word is used for both matzah and chametz bread, both called bread because it's made of flour and water. Okay, so now what's our order? Number one is bread, 2 loaves of bread. That's number one. That's the first priority. Priority number 2 is wine for the Friday night Kiddush. And priority number 3 is then the rest of the needs of your meal: meat, fish, salad, so on. I should note, if you look at footnote number 29, this is a Chiddush from a book called the Bavei HaShulchan, written by Rabbi Avram Chaim Noah, which we had occasion to read some of his writings with respect to the Alkain, the prominent Chabad halachic authority in Yerushalayim in the beginning of the century, who states in footnote 29 that the intent is not bread alone, but the minimal necessities of the meal. The needs for the meal, which he said earlier, does not take priority over wine, refers to extra foods. So he's adding, I'm not sure how you qualify this, but he's adding that when the halacha says we prioritize bread over your kiddush, that bread includes basic absolute needs for your meal. And then when the halacha says that once you have your basic needs met, get wine before the rest of your meal needs, it's talking about extras. So I'm not sure where exactly you define extras versus like your basic needs. Is a bowl of soup your basic needs? Is a slice of fish your basic needs? I'm not really sure.
Fish.
No, it's not the bowl. Yeah, these are all. No. I would imagine that, not imagine, I'm certain that the fish rabbinic enactment is much lower than the Kiddush rabbinic enactment.
Oh, yeah. But,
right?
but just to tie it in with 29.
It doesn't qualify. But it's
How
clearly
do you use this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure how to apply it.
Right.
But before Pesach,
yeah,
most people don't know the difference between kosher wine and kosher Passover wine.
That's not a discussion for right now, but 90% of wine is anyways kosher for Passover. 98% probably.
Matzah.
You have to be careful with that.
I'm not understanding the question. What?
There's a difference between kosher matzah and kosher for Pesach matzah.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They make matzah.
That is not kosher for Passover, certainly.
Yeah. So matzah not made for Passover shouldn't be used on Passover.
Right.
But most people don't know that.
To educate them.
I think it would be a good idea.
There's lots of things you got to educate people on.
But to get up on a Saturday or something, or before that.
Remind the rabbi before Pesach.
And
remind the rabbi before Pesach.
Very good. But most people don't know the difference.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue. So what do we have? We have the order is priority number 1 is 2 loaves of bread. Priority number 2 is Friday night Kiddush wine. Priority number 3 is the rest of the meal, the rest of your dinner. Okay, now next paragraph. Now, if Yeshle pass, he has bread now, so priority number 1 is covered. He has 2 loaves of bread.
Sorry, you should stress that they have to be whole loaves.
Yes, whole loaves, yeah, for lechem mishnah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, correct. Pass. He has bread. So priority number 1 is covered. He has 2 loaves of bread. The yain lekiddush alayla, and he has wine for the night kiddush. Priority number 2 is covered. Now, he now has enough funds. Yes, what's left now to buy is number 1, wine for the day kiddush. Yes, excuse me. No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So he has to buy now wine for the day kiddush. And he has to now buy the rest of his meal needs for both night and day. So he has 3 more items on his list he needs to buy. Items 1 and 2 he covered. Bread and wine is done. Priority 2, 1 and 2. And now he has 3 more to go. Day kiddush, night meal extras, day meal extras. We shouldn't call them extras because he calls them needs of the meal, but beyond bread. The supplementary meal items. Then the next on his pecking order, next on the priority order is extra meal. What was the word we just used? Supplementary meal needs for the daytime. Come before the daytime kiddush wine and before the nighttime meal supplements. Because the daytime meal is more important than the nighttime meal. So what's next on our priority? Priority number 1 is 2 loaves of bread. Priority number 2 is wine for the night kiddush. Priority number 3 is the rest of your daytime meal, your cholent. Your cholent comes before your soup Friday night and before your kiddush Shabbos day.
Your which one is that? Your what? Sorry.
Your daytime supplements.
Your daytime
So your
supplements
cholent.
come before your daytime kiddush.
Come before your daytime kiddush and before your nighttime supplements. So your cholent Shabbos day comes before kiddush Shabbos day and before Friday night soup. That's number 3 on the item. Your daytime meal. Make that beautiful. Sorry, that wasn't intuitive.
It doesn't seem intuitive.
You would think the kiddush day gets more, but it says no. Yeah.
Now, just
Well, there are 2. The pasuk, when the pasuk says to honor the Shabbos, covet, to give respect to the Shabbos, which we fulfill via our meal, the daytime meal is more important.
Right.
And thus your cholent comes before your Friday night soup, or before your even daytime kiddush. But your daytime kiddush isn't even a real kiddush to begin with. It's just agafen. And in this case, you'll do it on bread because you already have bread, considering that's priority number 1.
But when we kept running downstairs in the kiddush room on Saturday afternoon, this cholent comes way after the one.
And therefore,
You're saying we should have the cholent first.
No. We're talking about a person who has no means and he has to choose between what he's buying. That's what I mean by first, not in order of what you eat it. In first of, if I have no means, God forbid, and I have to choose, buy cholent or buy soup, buy cholent first. Or I have to choose cholent or kiddush wine for the Shabbos day, cholent. I'm not talking about the order of when you eat it. Eat it whenever you want. It doesn't matter.
So your day meal comes before your night supplement.
Correct.
Or your day kiddush.
Correct. That's priority number 3. And therefore continues. Likewise, if someone has a little bit of extra extra food items, extra food items, he has a few dips, he has a salad. So when should I take it out? Should I take it out for the Friday night meal or Shabbos day meal? Says the Alter Rebbe, you should leave them for the day meal. Don't eat them at night. Again, because honoring the Shabbos day, which is your meal, comes before honoring Shabbos night meal. Your daytime kiddush comes before your nighttime extras. So now we have the priority list. 2 loaves of bread is number 1 on your priority list. Number 2 is nighttime kiddush.
It's 2 loaves of bread night.
See, it doesn't say. I'm going to say it's 2 loaves of bread for both, actually. It's both. 2 loaves of bread for both meals is number 1. Because without the bread, you have no meal.
Yeah.
right? And you can get away with making Kiddush on the bread. So priority number one is bread for your Lecha Mishnah. Priority number two is wine for your night Kiddush. Priority number three is the rest of your daytime meal. Priority number four is your daytime Kiddush. Priority number five is the rest of your nighttime meal. Again, God forbid, for someone who's of little means and has to choose between buying these various different things. That's the order. Somewhat clear? But what are we missing? Where are we?
Because the Rambam says you have to have your night meal because of the night meal the proper way with the wine and the bread.
I want to pause a second. Nobody disagrees with that.
Right.
We're talking about someone who's of little means, God forbid, and has to choose by this or that. And the fact that you're telling me a person has to do his night meal properly, we know that already. This is, God forbid, someone who's of no means. He's got $5 in his hand. He's in the supermarket. He's got to choose what to buy. What does he do?
You can't buy $5 of wine.
$10, whatever the means are. You've got to choose, right? So of course he has to do all of it, but he doesn't have that option.
The wine doesn't give you the permission to eat the meal.
Sorry?
The wine doesn't give you the permission to eat the meal. It's the bread that gives you the permission to eat the meal.
So that's the question. What is your priority list?
That's the bread.
So that's what we just finished saying. Number one is 2 loaves of bread. Number 2 is your nighttime Kiddush. Number 3 is the rest of your daytime meal. Number 4 is your daytime Kiddush. And number 5 is the rest of your daytime meal. No, I'm sorry. I missed that. I got that wrong. Loaves of bread, nighttime Kiddush, daytime extras for your meal, daytime Kiddush, nighttime rest of your meal. That's the priority list. Yeah. Clear? Okay, weiter. Halacha tes. Sorry? God forbid, God willing, we will never have to implement these halachas. And thank God, nowadays, it's very rare that someone has to. And if someone does, God forbid, if to choose between these things, give me a call, we'll take care of you. There's many in the community that were happy to help in discreet and dignified manner, so no one has to ever struggle with, God forbid, any of these questions. But these halachas are still true and ought to be learned. Okay, halacha tes. Halacha 9. Osru chachamim. Our sages forbade litem klum, to eat anything, to taste anything. Afilu mayim, even water. This also comes from our Gemara in Psachim. One is forbidden to taste of anything, including drinking a sip of water. Mishigia zman hakiddush, from the moment the time for kiddush has arrived, achi kaddish, until he makes kiddush. So no taking anything until one makes kiddush. At which point does this prohibition begin? Tahainu mishigia ben hashmashis. From when ben hashmashis begins, it means from sunset. Sheneskadish hayoim misafik. At that point, we are in doubt. Did Shabbos start yet? Right? That's the Ben Hashmashis time. We're familiar with Ben Hashmashis. We're familiar with this time period between sunset and nightfall, which is neither here nor there. And therefore, in its more stringent thinking, Shabbos begins at the beginning of that period, at sunset. And therefore, from that point forward, no drinking or eating anything until one makes Kiddush. Or even earlier during the day, in Mispalal Arvis B'Joim, if he davened Ma'ariv by taking Shabbos in early. So either by the time the world brings Shabbos in upon you, you have to stop eating or drinking until you make Kiddush. And that would be from sunset. Or from the time when you've taken Shabbos upon yourself. So if you've davened Ma'ariv early, like we do here in the summer, and from that point forward, no eating or drinking until Kiddush is done. Right? Yeah? Clear?
Yeah. So we usually go to Freddy's.
I'm not going to comment on that practice. I'm not going to comment on it. I don't want to touch it. You'll learn halacha and you'll decide on your own whether it's appropriate or not appropriate.
But that may present a different issue altogether.
I really don't want to comment on it. We'll learn halacha and you'll make a decision as to whether it's appropriate or how it's appropriate or what's not. I'm going to learn the halacha. I'm going to explain halacha in its abstract truth.
In other words, you're saying that it's better not to drink.
I'm not saying anything. We're going to learn the halacha and whatever it says, we'll follow. Okay. So again, from the moment a Kiddush Shabbos starts, there's no eating or drinking until Kiddush is made. Now, When we look,
Over there, it's worship stuff.
I don't want to comment on it. I'm not commenting. You'll learn halacha and decide how you want to practice. Okay, so one may not eat or drink until Kiddush is made. From when the obligation for Kiddush begins, from when Shabbos begins, either from nightfall or from when the person davened ma'ariv. Now, when we learned this halacha in the Gemara, I mentioned to you that this is a universal principle. That is, the moment a person has an obligation upon themselves, one may not do anything, one may not eat until they fulfill that obligation. So in the morning, one may not eat until one shekul and esrog on Sukkot morning. One may not eat before a person has heard the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and one may not eat until one has said Shema, which is another obligation a person has. But there's a distinction in the way in which this prohibition is enforced with regard to other mitzvahs, as opposed to the way it's enforced with regard to Kiddush here. Namely, second paragraph of Halacha 9. Even though every mitzvah, which has a set time, the prohibition against eating is only that one should not fix and sit down for a meal from when the time comes. So which means I'm allowed to have a coffee in the morning before shofar, or before lulav, or snack. What's the problem? Why is it only a set meal? Mishum gzeida, because of the. Okay, I shouldn't give the examples of shofar and lulav, and because there are exceptions to this rule, but this is the rule in general. Let's say we'll use the example of ma'ariv at night. As soon as nighttime hits, one may not sit down for a proper meal until one has davened ma'ariv on a regular Tuesday.
Is there a half-hour window? Anything greater than a half an hour?
Okay, leaving the details of this halacha aside, but this is the essence of the halacha. Unless you have a set minyan later, there's a lot of exceptions to the rule. But this is the principle that one may not sit down for a set meal from when this obligation becomes. Why? Because there is a fear that one may be distracted and drawn into their meal, and miss the opportunity to do the mitzvah. And therefore, a little taste, a little snack, what there is permissible. Because we're not concerned you might be drawn into your snack and miss the time of whatever the mitzvah is in front of you. So why is it by Kiddush that we're saying you can't even drink or do anything? Right, this seems to be more stringent than the ordinary prohibition against eating prior to the fulfillment of a mitzvah when there's a locked time for the mitzvah. The prohibition ordinarily is against having a proper meal, which might draw you in, but a snack is permitted. And yet when it comes to Kiddush, we just finished saying, you may not eat, drink, or do anything, even a little bit of water. Nonetheless, the Kiddush, when it comes to Kiddush, when it comes to Havdalah, we are more stringent. And one may not eat or drink or do anything from the moment the obligation of Kiddush or Havdalah sets upon you. That is, from the moment of sunset, either Friday night or Saturday night. The laws of eating Saturday night, we discussed at great length already in the previous halacha. If a person starts his meal earlier, what the story is. But we're focusing on Kiddush here, namely, because the primary time to do the mitzvah is at the beginning. So let's explain. On a regular morning, there's a time frame in which a person must say the Shema. Right? There's a 3.5 hour time frame, let's just say. When's the primary mitzvah to fulfill that mitzvah of Shema? When's the primary time to do so? Anytime in that time frame. Anytime in that time frame. There's no priority as to which minute in that time frame the person has to say Shema, so long as it's in that time frame. And therefore, have a snack, no problem. So long as it's not going to be a kind of meal that's going to draw you in and you might pass the whole time, have a drink of water. It's not going to stop you from saying Shema. Why not? Because there's no priority of this minute over that minute. But when it comes to Kiddush, what's your time frame for Kiddush?
The moment it's also
the whole 24 hours in theory.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
The whole 24 hours of Shabbos is your time frame for Kiddush. And yet, you're told the moment it comes in, you have to do it. So even though your time frame for Kiddush is the whole entire Shabbos, there's priority given to the first minute. Because as soon as the opportunity comes to sanctify the Shabbos, you should do so. Well, the verse is to declare Shabbos sanctity. You've been sitting in Shabbos for the last 5 hours, and now you're declaring its sanctity. No. You've been sitting for 20 hours in Shabbos. Now you're declaring. Just by the very fact that the Torah instructs you to declare the sanctity of Shabbos indicates as soon as that sanctity is there. You're declaring the sanctity of the day, and if the priority is given to the earliest opportunity. So even though your time frame is in theory 24 hours, but it's different than the time frame of Shema. The time frame in which you have to say Shema, there's no priority to which minute you say the Shema, as long as it's within that time frame. But when it comes to Shabbos Kiddush, there is priority to the first possible minute. Clear?
But I would think otherwise, because Shema, if you pass the window, which is a much shorter window than Shabbos Kiddush, and you would think that you would have to do it right away because you may forget and miss the time frame.
Okay, so you added an important qualifier. You may forget. That doesn't mean that the halacha prioritizes 1 minute over the other.
But I'm
and therefore, the only issue is you may forget. And therefore, the Chachamim said, don't do something which is going to cause you to forget. Having a cup of water is not going to make you forget. That's the point. Because the issue is you may forget. That's the only issue in Shema. Then have a cup of water. It's not going to make you forget. But when it comes to Shema, it's not when it comes to Kiddush, it's not a question of you may forget. It's a question of positively, we prioritize the first minute possible, and you just delayed it by drinking water.
Oh,
and you shouldn't do that.
A different reason.
Correct. It's not just because you may forget, but because we prioritize minute number 1. When it comes to Shema, there's no priority of minute number 1, 2, or 10. The issue is you might forget. Okay, so we're preventing you from having a meal that make you forget, but a cup of water is not going to make you forget. Yeah, what do you want?
What's not clear is when you go, let's say, take the Kiddush Club, for example.
I don't want to comment on the Kiddush Club.
No, I'm just asking a question. It's nothing to do with the Kiddush Club.
Okay.
But let's say I'm at home.
Okay? Yeah.
And 7 o'clock is we're calling in Marib.
Okay.
We're calling the Shabbos at 7 o'clock.
Let's just say, right?
So at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to have a drink.
Again, from the moment your obligation for Kiddush begins, that's when you can't eat and drink. Did your obligation for Kiddush begin at 6?
Begins at 7.
So then you're allowed to drink at 6.
So that's what I'm saying with the Kiddush Club.
I'm not commenting on it.
But it's
I'm leaving it alone. I'm not commenting on it.
I thought we learned that the obligation of Kiddush doesn't fall upon us until after the prayer.
You have 2 options when the obligation of Kiddush falls upon you.
I know on Shabbos morning.
You have 2 moments when the obligation for Kiddush falls upon you. Option A is the second the sun sets, or option B if you daven Ma'ariv earlier.
Right, but we learned that on Shabbos morning, Kiddush doesn't fall upon you until after prayer. So that's why
your Shabbos day Kiddush is in Kiddush. Remember that. There's no bracha. You're sanctifying Shabbos in your Shabbos day Kiddush.
Okay.
Kiddush in this context, the biblical obligation for Kiddush is only Friday night.
Good.
Right.
That's why I was.
Your Shabbos day is not Kiddush. We're calling it Kiddush, but it's not.
Okay, for sure. Okay.
Right. It's only Friday night. Clear?
Good.
Okay. So this. Very beautiful. Continue.
So what's the distinction between the Kiddush Club before Shabbos?
I'm not commenting on it. I'm not answering.
Well, you have to tell me the boundaries.
Not answering.
I want the boundaries.
We're going to learn the halachas, and you'll decide accordingly.
Maybe after, not on.
I'm not. No, even after. I don't want to comment on it.
Oh, you're not.
I don't want to.
I had a question about that.
Sorry.
I had a halakha question about that, not whether it's right or wrong.
We'll learn and we'll see. You will see. You'll decide on your own. Okay, so again, the fisha ikim mitzvah mitchilas manam, because the primary obligation of Kiddush is the beginning of the time frame. Dainu samach l'knisas Shabbos, the samach l'yosef, which is as close as possible to the beginning of Shabbos, or with the Havdalah, as close as possible to the end of Shabbos. And therefore, there's no eater drinking period until one makes Kiddush, even a temporary meal. And therefore, there's no concern you might forget. You're not going to forget. It's just a cup of water. But by drinking a cup of water, you're delaying your obligation, which is prioritized at the moment of your drinking of water. And you shouldn't therefore drink water.
That would make sense too, because forgetting is a rabbinic ordinance, right? To prevent forgetting is a rabbinic ordinance.
The whole thing is rabbinic ordinance.
Whereas Kiddush is biblical. So therefore...
Kiddush is biblical, so is Shema biblical. But and the prohibition against eating is all rabbinic. The question is, what's the reasoning behind this prohibition? When it comes to ordinary mitzvahs, the problem is you might forget. Okay, so we're only prohibit the kinds of food that are going to make you forget. When it comes to Kiddush, the enactment is, well, hey, your obligation begins as soon as possible. Stop delaying it with your drink of water.
No, understood.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Vafin continues. Actually, we're going to stop over here because now begins a new set of halachas, which is the halacha of mid-meal covering your bread to make Kiddush. That's gonna come, God willing, tomorrow. Okay, wonderful day. Sorry, I'm
No, but I'm not saying anything about a Kiddush club, whether right or wrong, none of that. But I was just thinking that the time that hasn't fallen upon, it's not sunset yet. So if you're eating something prior to sunset, okay.
yeah, so far so
I'm
good.
not saying Kiddush club, I'm saying if you're
So far so good.
if
Yeah.
you're eating or drinking
Before sunset.
sunset,
Nope. So far so good. Yeah, no
you're
problem.
not in violation of Kiddush rules.
So far so good. Yeah.
Okay, that's it. That's all.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Other
That's
reasons.
it. So I'm gonna
might
leave
be
the. That's what I'm
attractive.
saying. I'm gonna leave the halacha in the abstract, and you'll apply it as you see fit.
So what is it, what is it with Kiddush club then?
I'm not in
That's not a
charge.
comment, Alan.
I'm not in charge.